There is a specific instant when power changes hands, and almost no one notices when it happens. It is not when someone wins an argument, nor when they prove they are right. It is in the exact moment an accusation appears and you decide, in silence, whether you will react like everyone else or act like the few. Perhaps this has happened to you more times than you can remember. A sideways comment, an insinuation, a doubt cast over your character, your competence, or your intent. The body heats up, the mind accelerates, and the immediate impulse is to explain, clarify, correct the narrative before it slips out of control. This seems logical, it seems fair, it even seems mature, but almost no one stops to observe the real effect of this movement, because in practice, each explanation does not solve the problem. It creates another, a more subtle problem, a deeper one, and far more dangerous for those who do not understand how the game works. The world is not organized by raw truth, but by perception. People do not react to what happened, but to what appears to have happened. And in this invisible territory, defending yourself is rarely a sign of strength. Most of the time, it is the first step toward losing control without realizing it. Those who master social power do not rush to extinguish emotional fires. They observe, they sustain. They allow discomfort to spread until the accusation itself begins to seem excessive, disproportionate, or weak. Silence, at this point, ceases to be absence and becomes strategy. This has nothing to do with coldness, arrogance, or contempt. It has to do with control. Control of rhythm, of framing, and of the energy of the situation. Those who speak first by impulse rarely control the outcome. Those who choose when to speak, or whether to speak, redefine the entire field. The greatest modern trap is believing that being understood is more important than being respected. From an early age, we were trained to justify our actions, prove our intentions, and clean our image before others. Few realize that this habit creates a dependence on approval. When you defend yourself, something silent happens. You validate the frame of the one who accused you. You accept, even without saying it, that this person has the authority to judge you. And from that moment on, it does not matter how correct your explanation is. The game has already been defined against you. Those who master social power do not rush to extinguish emotional fires. They observe, they sustain. They allow discomfort to spread until the accusation itself begins to seem excessive, disproportionate, or weak. Silence, at this point, ceases to be absence and becomes strategy. This has nothing to do with coldness, arrogance, or contempt. It has to do with control. Control of rhythm, of framing, and of the energy of the situation. Those who speak first by impulse rarely control the outcome. Those who choose when to speak, or whether to speak, redefine the entire field. Machiavelli would say that the mistake is not in being accused, but in responding as if you were on trial. True power begins when you understand that not every provocation deserves a defense, and that many accusations die on their own when they find no reaction. And it is exactly here that this idea begins to reveal itself with clarity. Because when you stop defending yourself, something unexpected happens. The focus shifts, the rhythm changes, and the entire dynamic begins to work in your favor, opening space for a kind of power that almost no one learns how to use. There is a moment that seems small, almost trivial, yet it decides everything in silence. An accusation appears, direct or subtle, and the body reacts before the mind. The impulse is immediate. Explain, clarify, correct. This sounds reasonable, even responsible, but this reflex is not strength, it is conditioning. And when you realize this, you understand that defending yourself is not protection, it is exposure. Defending yourself rarely convinces anyone, because the true battlefield was never the content of the accusation. When someone accuses, what matters is the frame. The instant you respond with explanations, you accept that frame. You agree, without realizing it, that the accusation deserves your energy, and in that second, power changes hands without resistance. Explaining seems noble, but it carries a hidden cost. By justifying your actions, you position yourself as insecure, reactive, emotionally dependent on acceptance. Even if your words are logical, the posture is submissive. Authority is not measured by the correctness of the argument, but by composure. The need to clarify reveals inner instability. The paradox is cruel. The more you explain, the more guilty you appear. Not because you are wrong, but because defense suggests vulnerability. Only those who fear judgment rush to dismantle it. Those who are secure do not hurry to be understood. They allow discomfort, and discomfort, when sustained, begins to work in your favor. By defending yourself, you legitimize the accusation. You treat it as something solid, worthy of attention. What could evaporate becomes fixed. The accusation stops being the problem. Your reaction becomes center stage. The focus shifts from what was said to how you reacted, and that is where status is decided. Strong people understand something most ignore. They do not rush to correct narratives, because narratives feed on resistance. When you react emotionally, you strengthen the story created about you. When you remain still, the story loses oxygen. Silence weakens assumptions more efficiently than any argument. That is why the powerful do not chase clarity. Clarity is not authority. Control is. Control of rhythm, of presence, of emotional energy, explaining hands that control to the other. It places you in their courtroom, answering questions you never agreed to answer. The moment you explain, you cease to be sovereign. Defense is born from the fear of being misunderstood. But being misunderstood is not dangerous. Being predictable is. Those who always explain themselves become easy to provoke, easy to read, easy to manipulate. Those who do not react become uncertain territory. Uncertain territory creates hesitation, and hesitation creates power without effort. The strongest figures you have encountered share a silent trait. They do not rush to justify themselves. They trust that presence weighs more than words. Accusations slide off them not because they are immune, but because they never grant legitimacy to the attack. When you stop defending yourself, something subtle begins to change. Tension leaves you and moves to the accuser. Words hang in the air, gazes linger longer. The absence of reaction becomes louder than any response. And in that space, a different force begins to operate. One that turns silence into something far more dangerous than speech. Silence is misunderstood because it is almost always confused with absence. Absence of response, of courage, of intelligence. But when it is born from presence, silence is not empty. It is density. It occupies space without making noise. And in social dynamics, what occupies space without explaining itself begins to exert immediate psychological pressure. In public, people believe they are observing the accusation. They are not. They are observing who remains whole and who fragments. The collective gaze does not seek justice, it seeks stability. Whoever loses emotional control loses the axis. Whoever remains calm redefines the center of the situation without saying a single word. When you do not react, something strange happens in the aggressor. The attack finds no resistance, and this creates an internal short circuit. His mind expected confrontation, defense, justification. Silence breaks the script, and when the script breaks, insecurity appears. The aggressor begins to feel that he has lost something invisible. This discomfort is not abstract. It manifests physically. The person talks too much, explains himself, repeats the accusation, changes tone. What was once an attack becomes exposure. Silence functions as a ruthless mirror. Without you saying anything, the other begins to show exactly who he is. The common mistake is to think that silence is passivity. In truth, it is strategic containment. It is the conscious refusal to enter the emotional game being proposed. While the other accelerates, you decelerate. While the other tries to dominate the space with words, you dominate the rhythm with presence. Whoever speaks first almost always loses control of the game. Not because speaking is weakness, but because speaking too early reveals anxiety. Silence forces the other to move without a map. Every extra word he adds increases his own vulnerability. You do not need to push. It is enough not to prevent the fall. In social environments, this effect is amplified. People begin to feel that something is out of place, but they cannot name it. The aggressor seems excessive, you seem solid, the symbolic balance shifts, and no one remembers exactly the initial attack, only the calm that remained at the center of the room. Silence also protects your weaknesses. When you respond impulsively, you reveal where it hurts, what matters, which buttons can be pressed. When you remain quiet, you give nothing. Silence is opaque, it returns no information, and what cannot be read cannot be manipulated. There is a difference between being silent and sustaining silence. Sustaining requires posture, gaze, a relaxed body. It is not withdrawal, it is stability. It is making it clear without words that you are not disorganized by this. This coherence between body and silence communicates more authority than any well-crafted sentence. Over time, silence creates reputation. People learn that provoking you generates no spectacle, it generates no drama, it generates no emotional reward. And where there is no reward, the attack loses meaning. You did not win an argument, you eliminated the need for it to exist. This is the point at which power changes its nature. It stops being reactive and becomes environmental. Your presence begins to influence before any word is spoken. Silence ceases to be a response and becomes expectation, something that precedes action and shapes the behavior of others. When silence matures, it does not merely neutralize attacks, it creates space for something even more decisive. A subtle, almost invisible movement where attention leaves you and turns entirely toward the one who tried to dominate the situation, now demanding that he explain himself, sustain himself, and justify himself. There is a point where silence ceases to be mere containment and becomes movement. It is when you realize that you do not need to defend yourself to win. You only need to redirect. The inversion begins the instant you refuse to respond to the content of the accusation and start acting on the structure that sustains it. Every accusation carries a hidden expectation. The accuser expects you to explain, react, justify yourself. He needs this to confirm his own position of superiority. When you do not deliver that reaction, you create a void. And psychological voids are intolerable for those trying to control the situation. The inversion happens when you shift the focus without confronting directly. Instead of pushing back, you move the attention. A simple, neutral, almost disinterested sentence is enough. It is not about what was said. It is about who now needs to sustain something in front of everyone. When you say, "Let's hear your alternative," something breaks. The accuser was not prepared to perform, only to point. Now he needs to produce content, coherence, security. The room changes position. The collective gaze leaves you and fixes on him. The hierarchy reorganizes itself in silence. This mechanism works because most accusations are born not from conviction, but from emotional impulse. When the impulse is forced to structure itself, it fails. The aggressor begins to explain himself, to justify his own attack. Without realizing it, he assumes the role he tried to push onto you. In social groups, the inversion is even more visible. An ironic comment, a veiled provocation, loses strength when it receives only an interesting that you see it that way. There is no confrontation, but there is displacement. The phrase does not rebut, it returns the responsibility of interpretation to the one who created it. In the professional environment, the effect is surgical. When someone questions your competence expecting defense, and you respond calmly by directing the discussion toward solutions, the attack reveals itself as empty. The accuser begins to be evaluated, not by the criticism, but by the ability to contribute. In relationships, the inversion acts on emotional tempo. When you do not enter the defensive escalation and respond only with "that's not how I see it," you create a pause. This pause forces the other to hear their own tone, their own emotional charge. The conflict shifts its axis. The central point is that you do not deny the other person's perception, but you also do not absorb it. You acknowledge the existence of the statement without accepting its authority over you. This creates an invisible yet solid boundary that redefines the dynamic without aggression. When the inversion is well executed, the accuser begins to move too much, explains too much, justifies too much, seeks support in the environment. Each attempt reveals insecurity, and the more he exposes himself, the clearer it becomes who lost control of the situation. This is the moment when power changes hands without announcement. There was no shout, no attack, no long response. Just a calm redirection. The audience does not remember exactly what was said at the beginning, only who kept the emotional center intact. True inversion does not humiliate, it displaces. It does not win by force, but by structure. You do not defeat the other. You force him to deal with his own movement. And few people know how to sustain this when they encounter no external resistance. This control of rhythm is the essence of social power. Whoever accelerates, loses. Whoever decelerates, dominates. By not reacting as expected, you break the automatic pattern and assume the invisible command of the interaction. The game continues, but now under different rules. Over time, this posture builds reputation. People learn that accusing you requires real effort, real exposure, real risk. Many stop trying, not out of explicit respect, but out of caution. And caution is a silent form of recognizing power. The inversion does not turn you into an aggressive person. It turns you into an unreadable one. And what cannot be read cannot be easily attacked. You cease to be an easy target and become an uncertain variable within the social dynamic. When this pattern consolidates, something greater begins to emerge, not just techniques, phrases or silences, but a presence that no longer requires defense. A posture where your simple stability redefines the environment, causing attacks to lose meaning before they are even born. After walking through all of this, one thing becomes clear. The real mistake was never being accused, provoked, or misunderstood. The mistake was always the haste to defend yourself, the need to correct someone else's perception before sustaining your own presence. When you understand that power does not respond to truth, but to stability, something rearranges internally. You stop living in a constant state of alert. You stop measuring every word. You stop explaining who you are to people who never intended to understand. From this point on, defending yourself begins to feel unnecessary. Not because you have become cold or distant, but because you realize that your existence is not under constant judgment. Most accusations are not seeking clarity. They are seeking reaction. When you remove the reaction, you remove the fuel. The attack loses its function, the criticism loses its weight, the provocateur loses direction, and silence, sustained with presence, begins to communicate something no explanation could ever transmit. This is the kind of power that does not shout, does not impose itself, and does not ask for permission. It simply establishes itself. People feel it before they understand it. They adjust their behavior without knowing why. They avoid crossing boundaries that were never verbalized. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He knew that the greatest human illusion is believing that reputation is built by defending one's image. In reality, the image strengthens when you stop chasing it. Throughout history, those who influenced the most were not the ones who explained themselves best, but those who remained firm in the face of attack. Not the most loved, but the hardest to destabilize. Power has always gravitated toward what refuses to be controlled. When you abandon constant defense, something curious happens. People begin to defend you for you. They sense the excess of the attack. They perceive the other person's imbalance. Silence creates a vacuum that the environment naturally tries to fill. This is not cheap manipulation. It is an understanding of human dynamics. It is knowing when to act and when not to act, when to speak and when to let the weight of the moment do the work for you. True strength is not in winning arguments, but in making arguments irrelevant, in not needing to prove value, in not bowing to the other person's emotional urgency. Whoever controls the rhythm controls the field. Machiavelli would never tell you to be good, just, or correct at any cost. He would tell you to be effective, to understand the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. And in the real world, rushed reaction always gives away advantage. When you stop defending yourself, you cross an invisible line. You stop being predictable. You stop being easy to provoke. You become someone who demands caution. And caution is a silent form of respect. It is not about never speaking, but about speaking only when it changes the game. About turning every word into a conscious movement and every silence into a strategic position. From that point on, even your absence communicates power. Machiavelli understood that whoever masters their own reaction masters the perception of others. And when you finally stop living in defense, something comes to an end. You no longer respond to the world. The world begins to respond to you.